What are the difficulties that a large organization like Voice of America is facing when you as the director is having the need to deal with an unprecedented crisis like the COVID-19?
Well, the first thing back at the very beginning, the first question was just figuring out information and figuring out what it was we were facing. And so I think everybody was in that situation. And I think the difference for us, and I bet that your members have this advantage too. Voice of America has newsrooms from 47 different countries. So as early as January, we were getting people coming back from Wuhan into our organization. And because they were coming back from Wuhan, and they weren't, surprisingly enough, they weren't Chinese. They were people who were married to Chinese and were there for the holiday. So we were able to see much earlier than everybody else that this was something really serious, and we had to take it seriously. So the very first challenge, and you can see people still facing it right now, was saying, this is important, we need to take it seriously. So that was the first challenge.
Do you think that through this process of having this information out about what is happening in China and how this transmitted to the rest of the world, do you think that sometimes the media of the Western world didn't have the accurate information on time about what was actually happening at the beginning of this crisis, where it was started?
Well, there's lots of reasons for it. One is, of course, it's called novel coronavirus because we haven't seen it before. So we didn't have accurate information as to what it was. You remember back a couple of months ago when people were saying, oh, it's just another flu, right? And so You didn't know that. The other thing is, in some ways, our experiences stood in our way because we'd seen Ebola, we'd seen SARS, and that was a very localized and regionalized issue. And so we were saying, oh, well, it's another one like that. And then the information that was coming out, you're right, was very slow coming out, not necessarily always reliable. And, you could see that inside China themselves, they were having trouble taking it seriously. So all those things came together and made it harder for us to decide what we were going to do. Like in the very beginning, we decided we were going to follow the recommendations of public health experts, including the CDC. But we pretty quickly realized by looking at our own situation that we were going to have to move faster than that the recommendations and the guidance was lagging what the reality was. So that's another decision we made, was to take our best guidance, but then to act more aggressively than that guidance suggested we should do.
And what was the greatest, let's say, challenge or the greatest barrier or the obstacle that you faced through the process of trying to adjust into this new reality?
Well, so a lot of your members are coming from broadcast organizations, so you understand how equipment heavy broadcast still is, even despite the digital changes. And so we had a lot of our shows, particularly our live shows, very dependent on being in a building. So we have, again, 47 newsrooms in this building. We have about 1,500, 1,800 hours of programming every week. And it was depending on a lot of the stuff that was in the building. And we actually didn't know to what extent we could disconnect. So what we started to do is we started to test our capabilities a little by little. So on one day, under the leadership of Sandy Sugawara, who is our deputy director and very, very responsible for our digital, we on one day just said, all the digital operations, never mind the television, all the digital operations are going to go out of the building and see what works and what doesn't. And so that was an enormous learning experience for us because we could see what we could do and what we couldn't do.
And what are the limits of the things that you were able to do?
Well, we started out with digital operations, of course, because that was the easiest to disconnect. And we moved towards television. So we began to move television out. A lot of our television is not live television, it's recorded television. So the recorded television was easier to move out, and we started moving that out. And then the last thing, and we're still working on this, is our live television, because the live television is the hardest thing to move out, and we're still working on trying to get that out. And, obviously the thing that we had to deal with was, did we have the right equipment? Did people know how to use the equipment? Did we have the training? How did our workflows were very dependent on being next to each other. How did we quickly build workflows that would let us do it in this different way? We found out that, you know, a lot of our people either didn't have Wi-Fi at all at home, or didn't have a powerful enough Wi-Fi. There was all kinds of things that we were having to test and you know, try and figure out what our capabilities were as we were going along.
Do you think that most of the journalists were familiar with the technical issues that they needed to face throughout the process of the adjustment in this new reality?
We had a lot of people who were really technologically savvy, but I would say that a very large number of them were not technologically savvy enough to do this kind of out of the building work. I mean, you can be technologically savvy and be able to put your own shows online and interact with audiences and things like that, but to do entire workflow outside of the building, you know, we had to draw on the skills of the most technologically advanced people. And I would say that one of the big benefits we got from this period is, first off, we found that there were so many leaders in our organization. So, you know, we had to depend on the leadership of all kinds of people who were looking at the workflow, who were looking at training, who were looking at getting equipment. And it was almost like, you know, the best part of a kind of a war or a campaign, where you discover that there's all this leadership capability inside your organization that you really didn't know about and weren't taking advantage of. That's a huge benefit for us.
And in terms of practicing journalism, do you think that this new situation will change forever the way that we perceive journalism, the way that we execute journalistic reporting, and the way that we operate as journalists?
Well, I'll tell you a couple of things that, I mean, the reason it will last forever is if we discover things that are better than what we had before. You don't want to do it because you can't go in the building. You want to keep doing it because it's better. So I think I've been saying that we increased our digital knowledge and capability and equipment status in 3 weeks in a way that we couldn't have done in a year. So we jumped ahead. Now, how does that make things better for us? It makes it better for doing what, you know, my old editors used to tell me all the time: get out of the office. Don't report in the office. Don't just sit there and scroll the internet. Get out. And so we were finding that a lot of our shows, even the anchor-based, desk-based shows, when we brought them out and took them out of the studio and they were doing their shows like standing in front of a hospital or standing on the mall in Washington, D.C., the shows became more lively and engaging and people liked them better. So I think there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to find that we will keep from this period.
And in terms of the topics of the stories, the one that has been dominating the agenda is, of course, around the COVID-19. How do you think that, what kind of information, what kind of unique information and reporting the audience expects from Voice of America?
You know, Voice of America has a very, very strong brand and reputation around the world, outside the United States, because we don't broadcast in the United States. And our very, very strong brand is that we're trusted. And so among our 47 countries, which include things like, you know, North Korea and Iran and China and Russia, about 85% of our audience says they trust us. That's an incredibly high trust factor. You know that most of your organizations don't have anything near that. The ones I used to work for don't have anything near that. So people trust us, and so that gives us a huge responsibility. Our responsibility then is to give trustworthy information. And so over and over again, we've been doing explainers. We've been doing public health explainers. We've been doing graphics to show people. We've been giving public service announcements. We had a huge, really important, what we called a virtual town hall, where we brought in 4 public health experts from around the world, and they were on a screen like this, all 4 of them, and we had a Voice of America moderator giving them questions that were coming in from around the world. It was some of the most factual, informative information I've seen. That's what I think our mission is right now.
Which countries did you see the highest increase in monitoring and receiving the information about the COVID-19, like the greatest interest?
So I think I don't even think we can answer that question, because we've never seen anything like this before, where a single word, a single topic is now virtually completely dominating our news. So our audiences are going up in all the countries we see. And when we get back, what are the highest performing stories? They're all about coronavirus. I mean, I was just looking at some of the statistics last night, and even in smaller countries like Vietnam or Myanmar, we're finding single stories about the coronavirus are getting 4.5 million hits, that people are reading those stories. That to me is extraordinary. We've never seen that before.
Because you have been a journalist in Wall Street Journal for years, and you have been an active reporter and editor, I would like to have your view on whether or not do you think that this crisis that we're going through, a human crisis, is at the same time an opportunity for real journalism to fix or restore any lack of credibility that probably people around us, the audience, was thinking about the media?
Yeah, I think there's so many opportunities, and that's certainly one of them. And by the way, I have to say I empathize with all your journalists. I myself started my career early on as a foreign correspondent. I was the Wall Street Journal's second Beijing bureau chief. So that was back when, even before the reforms took place. So it was back in the old China. So I know why you all want to get together, because being a foreign correspondent is very isolating, right? So you're out here by yourself. So I have to say, just as an aside, I empathize with all of you. And in terms of the opportunity to kind of repair our credibility, I think it's the flip side of what I said. We've got credibility, so we have to make sure we continually deserve it. And this is a huge opportunity. People are desperate for knowledge. So giving people knowledge that is straightforward, clear, easy to understand, that you can believe, that represents the best scientific knowledge at the time. And if things change, as they do in something new like this, making sure that it doesn't seem like you're just, telling things all, just all over the place. You say, well, we thought this until this, now we're changing and we're getting more information, we're learning more about this. And I think, in some ways, I think a little bit of a side issue, which is of course important, but all the kind of political sniping back and forth, country sniping back and forth, these are important things to talk about. But I think where we're going to be building our credibility is in the way our journalism touches people's lives.
And this is a great opportunity, this crisis.
Completely. I mean, I think everybody says it, and it's not comfortable to go through it, but never waste a good crisis. So yeah, it's an opportunity for us to step forward, to reach our audiences in ways that's important to them, to learn more about the way we operate. I mean, I'll give you another example inside Voice of America why it's a huge opportunity that I hope we don't lose. I'll give you, going back to the example, the person we originally had coming back from Wuhan was not a person from one of our Chinese speaking services. It was a person from somebody else. We started realizing pretty quickly the interdependency of this virus. So we have 47 newsrooms that mostly operate independently. They just do their own news in their own language. Now, all of a sudden, we're just having to depend on each other to share news across our services. That the Persian service and the Mandarin service are having to work together. The Latin American service is having to work with the Russian service and the Eastern European service, because everybody's got a piece of it. So it's actually creating a huge opportunity for us to maximize what we're learning and not just think of ourselves in little country silos.
And in a broader perspective, this can be also the message for the whole world, that the whole world and all nations together can deal with this crisis.
Absolutely. You can obviously see this is something very much unlike, we talked about the other epidemics that we've had in the past. This is very unlike those epidemics. It has not been contained in one small area. Because of that, you have public health people having to work together. You have people, because of the manufacturing going back and forth, the need for various, gloves and respirators and all these different kinds of things. This is all crossing all kinds of country lines. And you can completely see that even if you shut down travel as drastically as we've shut down, the world is still very connected.
Is there any story that reminds you from your background and experience this current situation that we're going through in terms of the seriousness, in terms of the impact that has in all over the world? Is there another story like that?
I don't think we've ever seen anything with this impact, never. And the people here who have had a lot more experience covering disasters, some of them compare it a lot to Hurricane Katrina, that there was something that just did something that nobody expected was going to happen at all and completely upended life in a whole region. If you take that and expand it out to the entire world, they sort of see the parallels. That I didn't cover that myself, but that's what they're talking about. It's not like war, and it's not like anything else that anybody else has ever covered before.
You mentioned before in one of your answers the need for trustworthy information, and I'm sure there has been some disinformation in terms of the information that goes around related to COVID-19. I'm aware of the Polygraph website that is doing an actual fact checking, and I'm very impressed about the work that has been done through this fact checking process. Can you tell us a little bit more about, for example, what is the role of the Voice of America in operating this website, and how you manage that, and what are the, how do you make sure that you catch all the disinformation stories, and what is the process of doing this fact check?
I'll answer the last one first. I think there's no way of guaranteeing we catch all the stories. What we're trying to do is keep the worst of the disinformation from going unchallenged. Polygraph.org is our fact-checking site, and we're a member of all the different groups that do fact-checking, and our goal is to do the same thing everyone else does, is to separate factual information from non-factual information. And we've been doing a lot of different things like that, following the volume of disinformation that's coming out. I mean, the stuff that's coming out on social media is really quite dramatic. But we're also putting together another piece, because a lot of the research shows that just saying something is false doesn't help inform people well enough. So we're combining it much more than before with accurate information. So we're putting those two things side by side. Instead of just saying, here's something that such and such country said, and it's not true. We're also saying, here's something such and such said, and it's not true. Here's 5 things that are true. So we're trying to combine those two things, because again, it fits with our mission of giving, believable, trustworthy information.
And this fact-checking is related to news from around the world, related to the news that has been diffused from media in specific countries.
So the polygraph.org started several years ago in response to our concerns about Russian disinformation at that time. So it started in the Russian language, and this is also giving us an opportunity to expand it out into other languages. So we're having people with investigative skills in our various languages. They're operating with our investigative journalists. We don't have a big team. We have investigative journalists who are helping these people in the different services do things. So we're trying to expand it out into other languages, and then take all of the information we have and make it available as much as possible in English, so that everybody can see it and can share it around the different services.
Correct. Thank you very much for this conversation that we have had.
Yeah, I'd like to really thank you, and I'd like to thank all of your members for what you do, because I know from my own background, I know from having a staff full of foreign correspondents, just how difficult and challenging rework is. I also know how exciting it is, but I also know how important it is. So I want to thank all of you for what you're doing. And I'm sure a lot of you have left family behind that you're worried about back home. And so I'm sure that adds to your stresses. So I'm just saying thank you. Thank you very much for your dedication.